Hello and welcome. I'm Valerie Paley, Senior Vice President, Chief Historian, and Director of the Center for Women's History at the New York Historical Society. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Louise Mirror, our President and CEO, Pam Schaffler, Chair of the Board of Trustees, all of our trustees, Joyce B. Cowin, Diane Max, and the late Adam Max, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, along with our Chairman's Council, our members, and our many other generous donors. None of the work of New York Historical is possible without your continued and committed support. As many of you know, we launched the Center for Women's History in early 2017. It is the first initiative of its kind in the nation within the walls of a major museum. Now, even during this challenging time of the COVID-19 pandemic, we remain committed to exploring the lives and legacies of women who have shaped and continue to shape the American experience. Which brings me to today's kickoff keynote conversation, launching the 6th annual Diane and Adam E Conference on Women's History, Breaking News, Breaking Barriers, Women in American Journalism. The format for this year's conference will be a little different, consisting of a series of conversations and panels, which we will air over the course of our related exhibition, Cover Story, Katharine Graham, CEO. I am delighted and honored to introduce today's extraordinary panel. Peggy Noonan is an opinion writer at the Wall Street Journal, where her column Declarations has run since 2000. She was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 2017. A political analyst for NBC News, she is the author of 9 books on American politics, history, and culture, from her most recent, The Time of Our Lives, to her first, What I Saw at the Revolution. She is one of 10 historians and writers who contributed essays on the American presidency for the book Character Above All. Noonan was a special assistant and speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan. In 2010, she was given the Award for Media Excellence by the living recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor. The following year, she was chosen as Columnist of the Year by The Week. She has been a fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics and has taught in the history department at Yale. Before entering the Reagan White House, Noonan was a producer and writer at CBS News in New York and an adjunct professor of journalism at NYU. Lesley Stahl has been a correspondent with CBS News 60 Minutes since 1991. She's reported on politics, science, medicine, crime, and the arts. In other words, every kind of story there is. She's most known for her interviews recently with ex-President Trump, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, along with JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, Facebook's Mark Zuckerberg, and many more. Before 60 Minutes, she was CBS's White House correspondent through the Carter, Reagan, and George H.W. Bush administrations. She was the moderator of Face the Nation from 1983 to 1991. Ms. Stahl is the author of 2 books, Reporting Live and Becoming Grandma. Our moderator today is Missie Rennie. She spent 35 years in television news, most of them as executive producer of CBS News Sunday Morning and CBS Weekend News. She is the recipient of 8 Emmys and a George Foster Peabody Award for her work. Ms. Rennie is a member of the board of the Asia Foundation, the Asian Cultural Council, the IRC Board of Advisors, Vassar College, Teachers College, the USTA Foundation, and Global Cities. She was the recipient of the Henry Luce Foundation Luce Scholars Fellowship and lived and worked in the Philippines. She serves on the selection panel for Luce Scholars and the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans. Welcome, Peggy, Lesley, and Missy.
Thank you, Valerie. We have a lot to live up to. Peggy and Lesley, I'm delighted to be with you. And you all are the ones that broke through in the world of news and politics in the very beginning. And today you are still breaking through. You are the 2 most seen, most read weekly events in my life, especially this year. Your work are regular appointments on my news calendar. Lesley, 60 Minutes every Sunday at 7 p.m. And think just the recent weeks that were mentioned with the Nancy Pelosi interview the Sunday after the storming of the Capitol and the Donald Trump interview in the last days of the campaign. Peggy, her column every Saturday in the Wall Street Journal. I hang on her every word with her unique take on our political landscape, with her analysis most recently about the future identity of the Republican Party. Ironically, all three of us were at CBS News early in our professional lives. Yes, back in the good old days, the 1970s, CBS News was the place to work. Lesley was in the Washington Bureau of CBS covering Watergate. In fact, I first met Lesley in the Watergate hearing room in 1973. Peggy was in New York in radio at CBS. A primary assignment for her writing in that time was Dan Rather's radio commentary on a weekly basis. So I'm thrilled to be back with colleagues from my history, and I thank you both for joining us. I wanted to start out by you all giving me a flavor of what motivated you to enter the news media, what piqued your professional interest, especially as it was a world in which there were very few women. And I'll start with Lesley.
Oh my goodness. Well, when I went to college, there was no, at least for me, any opportunity to get involved in journalism. I was not interested in it. And as far as a profession, I was really basically unaware of it. I came to New York after college. I was going to be a doctor, but I hated pre-med. So I got a job with Mayor Lindsay. And I went into the press room one day and I asked a reporter, "What do you do all day?" And when he finished talking, suddenly I had a passion. I really had a passion. It was like a click that I have to do this. I have to be a journalist. And that was, wow, that was I don't want to tell you, 67, 68. And I really did start at the bottom and kind of crept my way slowly up until I became a reporter and then joined CBS.
And Peggy, what were your moments of thinking about this world?
Well, I knew early on I was a writer. I didn't know where I would be a writer or how I would make my living, but I just thought I am a writer. I thought that in high school and in college. I was a great reader of the great newspaper columnists of the 60s and 70s and 80s. I was always reading Jimmy Breslin and Murray Kempton, Pete Hamill, in the New York Post, Harriet Van Horn. And I remember being that drawn and thinking maybe I could do that someday. At my college, which was Fairleigh Dickinson University in Rutherford, I had been a dreadful high school student and was not accepted at any colleges, went to college at night at FDU, at what was then my hometown. After 2 years, was accepted during the day. And when I started being a daytime student at Fairleigh Dickinson, I looked around and thought, what's here that could be really interesting, aside from trying for the first time in my life to get good marks? I saw there was a campus newspaper. I started out writing stories and little essays for it. Finally had a column in the campus newspaper and saw myself, therefore, as a person who looked at the world around her and had thoughts about it and came to conclusions about whatever was going on. It seemed to me from those thoughts that I would work on a newspaper or in any news media. From Jersey, I went to New York and auditioned for jobs, and everybody told me, you don't belong in New York. New York is where you wind up. It's not where you start. Go find a job someplace else. So I found a job at a radio station in Boston at WEEI Radio, which was then a CBS owned and operated station. It was all news. They needed someone to work the overnight, keeping track of the wire service stories and writing them up into news stories. And that is where I began, and never left that until I went to work for Ronald Reagan and then went back to the news afterwards. So that was my journey. I guess it starts with being a writer, or seeing myself as a writer.
And Peggy, what did you find was the greatest challenge as you sort of started in this field of radio, television, politics?
Peggy.
The greatest challenge, being young and stupid is always a challenge. That's a real challenge in anybody's life.
Being old and stupid is too, by the way.
Having to learn how things are done, having to change my mind from a long form writer to a short form writer in radio, being a young woman and being informal in the way of my generation, and not showing particularly respect for how things should look and sound. Those things were challenges for me.
Lesley, how about you?
I'm gonna talk about being female. When I was young, Peggy, I also started in Boston, so there's something in the air there, I guess. I guess one of my early challenges was not thinking of myself as a girl. And I remember having trouble with that and seeing a psychiatrist. And he said, tell me about your conversations with your boss. And I did. And he said, you know, there's two people in every conversation. And you are not presenting yourself as a professional. You're engaging him in this kind of flirtatious banter. And it was, for me in my career, I think that lesson from that psychiatrist, because he role played with me. If he said, I'm your boss, I say this, what do you say? Was really, really formative and vitally important for my career.
You know, it's interesting because I guess I'm going to go on to ask when you think your breakthrough moment was and when you feel like you found your voice. But there's a quote from Lesley that says, I was born on my 30th birthday. I wanted to be a journalist, which meant surmounting my femaleness and my blondness. So which I enjoyed reading. But so Lesley, when did you feel like you had turned the corner or gotten your voice?
There wasn't a moment. I wasn't one of those young people who hit the scene and had that epiphany moment where I realized my voice and all of that. It just was a slow slog. And wonderfully, when CBS News hired me, it was affirmative action time. And our boss, who ran the Washington bureau, Bill Small, was committed to the young people he hired out of the affirmative action program. And we were brought along very slowly. You could either be a lowly reporter at CBS News, and you know about this, Missy, or you could be a correspondent. You had to earn the right to be called a correspondent. And it always took a long time. And so I was brought along. My boss was committed to the program. They taught us. I would go out with the senior correspondents and watch how they gathered information and how they checked their sources and things like that. So I don't think I had one moment. It just was an accumulation of constantly learning.
Peggy, sort of a moment for you or a slow climb too?
You know, there's a funny thing. When I look back, I put together a collection of things I had written a few years ago. And I went through boxes of old papers, finding the things that I had written at CBS and in my early op-ed days and for magazines and at the Journal. And what struck me was going back even 30, 35, 40 years, I sounded like myself back then, which made me think you are yourself before you even know it. You always think that you grow into yourself, but you are you, even in your very early days. And you can see it if you look back at your work. At the same time, there are things like confidence, confidence, which takes time and has to be earned. Things like respect, which takes time and has to be worked. I told you the other day, Missy, I remembered being a young writer on the radio desk at CBS Broadcast Network radio side. and doing an essay for Dan Rather. Dan Rather had a daily 5-minute radio show that was all written, meaning there was no sound to distract. I don't know why that was the tradition, but that was like a daily column. That was like a daily 800-word column. And it was a hard job, and I worked very hard, very committedly at it. But in those early days, I brought one of my essays, one of my shows, to an old editor on the desk at CBS. And he just had to check it out. He had to, make sure nothing libelous or slanderous was said and no grammatical gaffes. And he looked at it and he apparently liked it. I was a young woman. I was in my 20s still. And he looked at me appraisingly and he said, "Who wrote this?" And I said, "I wrote this. There's my name on it." And he said, "Yeah, but who wrote it?" Meaning,
Ooh.
this is good. You could not possibly have written it. Because he saw me, he was ancient, meaning he was like 62, which in those days was real ancient. And he was simply not used to women being around, women being in the newsroom, women doing responsible and serious shows, and women doing it well. And, it was an unforgettable moment for me, unforgettable in terms of resentment. Just, I'm a woman. I did this work. It's the equal to yours. You shouldn't be shocked by that. And yet, sympathy or pity also, because I remember that moment as thinking, you're going to lose this argument. You are on the losing side. I am on the winning side. This network is opening up. Used to be old white guys. It's opening up. Women are here now. Minority group members are here. There is going to be variety that is most extraordinary. And you're going to have to understand that. And you're going to have to move forward. So that's kind of a long-winded answer. I'm not sure it was an answer, but those were my thoughts.
It's funny. I just have to mention, I was with Walter Cronkite on Pointe du Hoc when he gave his famous speech that Peggy wrote for, considered one of his best speeches in Pointe du Hoc and Normandy, the 40th anniversary. So I feel like I was there for your words then. I guess sort of continuing on in the line of what we're talking about, were there any moments that you look back and sort of, you've described some challenging moments, but really uncomfortable moments for you or for women that you were working with that you sort of felt like you had to course correct or gave you pause?
I wanted to mention that when I came into the business at the network level, it was the middle of the women's movement, the middle of Gloria Steinem and Betty Friedan. And I remember respecting them, but I was on the outside looking in and fighting the little battles at CBS because as I said, my boss was committed to bringing women and minorities into CBS News. But I remember, now I'm going to jump ahead to 1979, and I was covering Jimmy Carter, and the executive producer of the Walter Cronkite's Evening News called me on the phone. I remember being in the White House. I get this phone call, and he said, there's this report about hysterectomies, that doctors are performing more hysterectomies than ever by leaps and bounds. And I'm thinking, I think this is the lead story tonight, but I wanted to check with you. Do you think, and I was the woman, do you think this is a proper lead? Now, CBS never led the evening news with what was considered women's issues, which would have been health, education. And I said, yeah, this is a lead. And I hung up. He did lead with it. And I thought, this is a turning point. Not only that they led the show with women's health, but that he called the woman. There were no other women for him to consult with. He had all his editors around him. He had all the producers, and they weren't women. And he picked up the phone and called the woman. I thought if there were more of us, there would be a tilt so that women's issues would also be considered news. And that absolutely happened as more and more women came into journalism. There were always women in journalism, by the way. It wasn't that there weren't any. It was just the idea of a critical mass.
Yeah.
Those subjects that were considered girly or whatever became hard news. And I remember living through it and thinking, and even knowing then that I was living through it, a real sea change before my eyes.
Let me throw out, Missy, when I look back at the frustrations, sometimes the humiliations or the embarrassments of being sort of in a minority position and in a breakthrough generation and a breakthrough time. One of the things that was very helpful to me was an inability at the start of my career, and I think it carried on for years, to see challenges and barriers clearly. In the funniest way, a natural, perhaps optimism, but perhaps a learned blindness about all the challenges you can face kept me from seeing them. And the fact that I was kept from seeing them by my own psyche kept me from not worrying that much about them or anticipating them or getting a pain in the pit of my stomach about them. Do you know what I mean? A certain amount of blindness in life can be helpful. I hope that point is clear. I'm not sure that it was, but it's a funny thing when I hear women of my generation remember all of the humiliations, problems, and challenges. I'm aware I don't have that much to say, and one of the reasons is I was unable to see it. If I had seen it, I would have been paralyzed.
I agree with Peggy. I feel the same way. I look back, I'm always asked the question, what was the humiliation? What was the moment where somebody was trying to crush you because you were female? And I can't come up with any either. And it may just be a mindset. I wasn't going to allow myself to ever say that my problems were sexism. I wasn't going to have it. If I had a problem, it was a shortcoming within me.
Absolutely.
And that doesn't mean I didn't have these issues, because I did. I look back and I had a lot of trouble with cameramen wanting to work with a female correspondent.
We were sort of talking about the fact that we were all mothers and mothers with young children during some of the hardest parts of our career when we were trying to move forward and make strides professionally. Peggy, describe how that piece fit into your life and how challenging it was.
Well, I went from CBS, where I was working for Dan Rather, to the White House, where I was working with Ronald Reagan, then president, on his speeches. Then, at the end of a certain 4 or 5 year period, I wrote my first book. I was divorced. I had a young son, my baby boy, Will, and I left Washington, returned to New York, tried to, in a way, remake and resettle my life. And for the next 15 years or so, I simply tried to survive as a professional writer, which was kind of hard. Writing books, often going out and making speeches. We had been discussing how that's part of the life of a writer now, going out and speaking, being on the speakers tour. It was just the hardest. That was actually the most harrowing time in my life, those 15 or 20 years. The pressures of money, the pressures of, if you're a writer, you may have a book that gets great reviews, and you may get another book contract and work for 3 years, and then your book comes out and you get terrible reviews, you get clobbered, and it all has huge implications. So that was a hard time. And I think the thing I learned about that is just keep putting one foot in front of the other. That's all. Just keep going forward. Do you have something to say in an op-ed piece? Say it in the op-ed piece, and just take your chances. I mean, be honest, say what you're seeing. That may not be a fashionable thing to see, but do it. You want to write a book and you can get a book contract, just go forward, do it every day. Take the stones and arrows, just survive that. In time, keep bugging. You'll go into a new season.
We were talking about the personal side and being mothers with young children during some of these times of working our way through the system. So I remember being in Reykjavik for the Gorbachev-Reagan summit, being 6 months pregnant. So we all have our moments that we remember like that.
Well, I always say that the most important thing for me when I was a working mother was my mother, who gave me full permission to be a career woman with a child. I know a lot of my friends in my position had mothers who were making them feel guilty. My mother went in the opposite direction. I was the one with the little guilt, and she was always telling me, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. People say, how did you do it? The answer is, I have no idea. I have no idea how I did it. And most working mothers say the same thing. We don't, how did we do that day to day? I don't know. And my daughter never questioned that I was her mother. She will tell you that. And she'll also tell you that she was actually, when she got a little older, that she was relieved that I went to work, because if I had all that energy and just focused on her, she knew that it wouldn't have gone well. The other piece of it is friendship with other women, because your friends help you raise your children. My mother's friends helped raise me, and my friends helped raise Taylor, my daughter. And it was important to me to have those circles of women friends professionally, because I spent all my days, the daylight hours with men. And I began to crave the company of other women just for the kinds of conversations we were having, which was different than the ones in the office. So I think my mother was key, and my friendships were key. And my husband, who's a writer, was just the most committed and wonderful father. So it's kind of the support network that you create yourselves and build around you that helps you get through it. No one's going to say it's an easy thing. But I do think we raise I think career women raise healthy children.
I want to move a little more to the recent past and the present. And I'm just, we've had 4 years of the Trump presidency. We now have the transition to Biden. And I'm just sort of curious, when you look back on the body of work and the things you've done in these last sort of 5 years, is there something that stands out to you as something you feel extremely proud of, or just sort of stands out as something that you will always remember as part of your career?
You know what? Let me say something that grows out of something Lesley said when she said she looks back, when people say to her, oh my gosh, a woman, second wave feminism, male newsrooms, you had a child, you're trying to live, how did you do it? She says, I have no idea. One of the things I've been pondering recently, in total agreement with what Lesley said, is that if you understood, as you live your life and be in your career, if you understood the import of what you were doing at the moment you were doing it, you never could have done it. There's you know what I mean? And just Lesley didn't actually know when she walked into some of her interviews that this would be a groundbreaking interview remembered for decades. When I was, there are many examples. If I had thought to myself when I was working for Ronald Reagan, when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded just before noon one day, I just felt responsibly as a professional, as an American, and as a person who who wanted to be helpful, I thought, I'm going to have to get to work on a speech. I know the president will speak. That was 35 years ago. If I had known at the moment I was working then that it would turn out to be something so remembered in history, my goodness, I'm not sure I could have fully done my work. I think it would have kind of scared me. So I guess maybe the lesson of what I'm saying is do it every day. Do your best. Be who you are. Don't let the world stop you. Move forward in your small steps. And don't allow a sense of historical consciousness will not necessarily help you in the day-to-day, but now and then look back, have a long lens, appreciate yourself, appreciate what you're doing, and realize, you know what? I'm doing my best here. I think I'm doing a good job. And I think I'm doing it against the odds. Take some satisfaction on that, to give you some sense of excitement to propel you forward in the future, and then go back to the daily, day-to-day. I'm not sure that made any sense, but there's a core of intelligent thought in there.
Definitely.
If we had more time.
So I want to answer your question this way. When I was in college, I took a seminar, and the question that we explored was, what's the most important force in history? Is it a single person? And actually, the question was a single man in history that changes the course, or is it technology? So I want to talk about technology and the huge dramatic differences that I have lived through just in terms of career, just in terms of journalism. Starting out in the 60s and 70s, when we had broadcast news and the entire country saw the same thing, heard the same thing, not just the same events, but almost the same commentary on the events. There was a homogenization of information. And the country was brought together, and everybody started wearing the same clothes and having the same accent, which hadn't been true before. And then we moved into cable, and that broadcast began to disintegrate, and it became more local. And then we had the internet, where you just go and seek out your idea. The regionalism went away. It was you sought out your political thought and went there. And now I don't even know how to describe what we're living right now. But each step, each change in the technology changed the way we report the news, both technologically and even obviously in the tone. And it's been dramatic. For me, I feel like I've lived through a golden age, which was broadcasting, and I've come around. I feel like there's a terrible arc here, and we've come to some end. And I every day say to myself, are you feeling that there's been an end because you're older and you've lived through it, and young people don't see it this way? Or am I seeing reality? Am I seeing something painfully negative happening to American journalism? I worry about it all the time. I worry about it in my sleep, that what's happening historically has really hurt my profession. And I worry about the future for us, meaning reporters.
I was going to get to this a little later, but just to remind people that, CNN started in 1980, and then MSNBC and Fox News started in 1996, and then we get to the internet, and then we get to podcasts. And we were talking the other day about the fact that sort of breaking into the world of media news, is it harder now, or is it easier? And Peggy, I remember you talking about the fact that you can create your own voice in this world because there's so many outlets. And so to Leslie's points, there's the good and the bad that comes with it. And I just wish, Peggy, you would sort of relate the thoughts you were espousing the other day about the opportunities as well as the downfall, the pitfalls.
Yeah. I very much second what Lesley said. I share all of her concerns. The media environment now, and I say this knowing there's actually no more boring phrase than media environment. What has changed is that a number among the things that have changed is there are so many ways for you as, say, a young writer, a person with thoughts that you want to share. There are so many ways for you to get your work seen and for you to come forward and be noticed and for you to earn respect. That is the good part from, technologically from any of these things. You can become a famous person on Twitter. What do you need to join Twitter? Just get a free Twitter account. So that's the good part. The bad part is what I see with young journalists is it is hard to make your signal heard through the noise. If there's a million people, doing what you're doing, it's a little hard to get noticed. It's also harder to make a living, I think. When Lesley and I were at CBS News, we both belonged to unions, and union membership meant a certain amount of security. But I remember the best part was that I was always scheduled for an 8-hour shift. And sometimes somebody called in sick and my shift became 10 hours, 12 hours, 14 hours. I was paid overtime. It was great. I needed the money. So that was fabulous. I got overtime because of the union. Jump now to today. I see young editors and writers almost glued to their iMac computers, working all the time, and there's no such thing as overtime. Do you know what I mean? It's so much less secure, I think. And in the old days when there were 3 big batters, 3 big networks, if you worked there, you felt you were part of something fabulous. Lesley mentioned, how we felt about CBS News. For me to say in 1977 that I was working at CBS News, it was like it's 1928 and you said, I play for the New York Yankees. There was such pride. I think at the New York Times, they felt that way. It's, at certain wonderful news institutions. I am not sure the same esprit prevails, maybe in the same places. But I'm just not sure that the young now get to have a romantic sense of the place they work at if they're in journalism. When I walked through the halls at CBS News, first of all, I was surrounded by the guys who had been the Murrow boys, who had been fabulous figures of the 1940s and 50s and 60s. Down that hall was Walter Cronkite's show. Down this part of the building, they had actually put together and voiced Harvest of Shame, one of the greatest documentaries in the history of broadcast news. So there was all that esprit and a sense of hollowed halls. I am not sure the young get to feel that so much. Finally, just to wrap it up, when you joined a great broadcast network or the New York Times or the Washington Post 40, 50 years ago, you got a sense you might be joining something for life, that you owe your best work and your loyalty, and it would give you loyalty in return. I'm not sure the young in journalism get to enjoy that anymore either.
Hear, hear.
It was interesting. I was looking up a McKinsey study that I was just reading about the fact that we feel like there are more women in journalism than ever. And it said that 6 out of 10 graduates of journalism schools or majors in media in recent years have been women. So 60% of the people that have had that as their sort of field of study, and that the entry-level jobs in the media really are dominated by women. But then as you get up the ladder, it starts to drop off. And so I was just curious what you do say to women today to get them to stick with it. They get those entry-level jobs, but to see it as a career path with all the...
Well, I worry that journalism is partly what Peggy said, but that it just isn't widely respected as a profession anymore. Forget the money idea. I don't think people are making nearly the amount of money that we made as we came up, but just the respect. I mean, Donald Trump really took care of that. But what I see when I look out at the journalism landscape, both print and broadcast, is women surviving. I don't see a drop off for women. So I'm surprised to hear that that's some kind of a survey. I see young women and I see older women. And I think we're surviving at the same rate as the men. So that's my perception.
Yeah.
And I worry though that I would not encourage, I would not urge, I would not push the idea of journalism on young people today. I did maybe 10 years ago, but I wouldn't stand up there before a group and say, look, this is the greatest profession for you. Right now, I'm not sure that it is the greatest profession for young women today. I say that with such sadness. It breaks my heart. And I hope it comes back, because I think our form of government demands a strong press. It cleanses the system. It keeps us from being more corrupt than other countries. It shines the light where light needs to be shown. It brings people, it should bring people into a sense of community. And all of that seems not to be surviving right now.
Yeah.
I don't want to be dark about this, but I feel that way.
Can I jump in? Two things. One is the great news organizations cutting back in terms of expenses and not committing themselves to local bureaus nationally as much as they had is a bad thing. The end of local newspapers, the local pork chop paper you used to have in your town in New Jersey or Illinois, the death of them for economic reasons having to do with the internet that we're talking on, has been a bad thing. One of my fears is connected to what Lesley said at the end. If you do not have the extremely time expensive and financially expensive commitment to local journalism, to having a Trenton bureau and following what is happening in New Jersey with money, you are going to have what I suspect we are living in, which is a golden age of graft. I know people don't respect reporters. I know they don't respect journalism, but man, they need reporters and they need real journalists. And I think it's almost a matter of being a citizen. If you've got a big broadcast network or a big newspaper, you got to spend the money. As a citizen, you ought to help protect your country by letting your country know what's going on at the local level where the money flows.
I know we all sort of probably feel that we've had some people in our lives that have been our mentors, sort of going along this path. And I'm wondering if you all feel sort of mentorship throughout the ranks of women looking out after other women in the industry now, or not. I don't know if you feel you play that.
Sure.
Yeah. And what way is it, Lesley?
Well, I thought you were going in a different direction. So let me just say, I never had mentors in that sense, obviously.
Oh, really? That's okay. Right. I'm interested to hear you say that.
Yeah, no.
There weren't any. Who were they going to be?
Yeah.
But today I do feel a sense of responsibility to talk to young women who are feeling strangely some of the very same insecurities I felt. Young mothers who are afraid to take time off to go to a kid's game or to go to a doctor's office. I had a young woman in my office not long ago telling me about this. And I said, what? After all these years and everything, my generation went through, you're still afraid to take time off for your child? I'm astonished at how much has changed and how little has changed. And I do feel an obligation to encourage young people, whether it's in journalism or anywhere, career women, to stay with it, be brave, and take care of your children above all else, Right, Peggy? Don't you think that?
Yes, I do. Let me say on mentors, I have a feeling that whole phenomenon is somewhat exaggerated in a way, its importance. I never had a mentor. Lesley never had a mentor. There were no women around me or above me when I was coming through to be helpful to me. But I think a lot of people tried to be fair to me, you know? So there's a million people I could thank, but there's no one or two or three. One of the things I do now at my age and stage, it's not mentoring, it is encouragement, which I think young people need as much as anything else. And it is reading things and seeing things on television or on the internet that really impress me, that are obviously the result of good work and good effort and seriousness. And I search those people down. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes not. And I just say, hi, this is who I am. I just read that essay you wrote. It is absolutely fabulous. Congratulations on it. It's just wonderful work. And I deliberately, when I see great work, just try to seed it with encouragement, because the great thing I needed 40 years ago was encouragement, was a sense that this will all turn out okay.
Well, I'm going to give you one last round, and which is sort of, can you imagine having been in any other profession? I've always sort of said that the news business is a drug, and you become addicted to it, and you get to see life through so many lenses. So I'd love to you each to have sort of your last take on these careers you have pursued.
Well, I told you all about how I was introduced to journalism when someone told me what he did all day, and I had that which was a drive to do this, to become part of this world. And I knew at that moment I would love this career. And I go into work still every day with the same kind of excitement. You're constantly learning. It's like going to school every day, which is great, I think. It's meeting extraordinary people, and I don't mean heads of state. I mean extraordinary people in small towns and little professions, meeting people who think and care. I feel that the privilege of spending time exploring this country, this world, and then imparting the information that I see has just, it's been enriching and thrilling, and I've loved, I have to say, almost every single day of it. Crazy, huh?
Peggy, a final word?
A final word was, I guess, I was going to become a writer. I was going to become some kind of writer in some kind of area of life. It doesn't seem to me surprising that at 18, I was in love with columnists and somehow became a columnist. Do you know what I mean? I liked the form of the column. I liked the art form of the short essay that perhaps carries something rich within it. To me, you know, it's just fabulous to try to have an honest, true thought about what you see around you, come to some conclusions, however preliminary, about what it is you're saying, and then say it to people. And then you say it publicly, and then people write back to you and say, thank you. That's exactly what I was thinking, but I hadn't put it into words. Or they say other ruder things, but at least you got something going. I have a conversation going. I have been Saturday morning at the Wall Street Journal since, I've been at the Journal for 20 years, but I've been Saturday morning in the weekend edition since I think 2006. And I actually feel that I have a community of friends to whom I am writing each week. It's so satisfying and it's exciting, and it's exciting. It's a good thing. I'm very glad. I think both Lesley and I can say one of the great things that you can have in a career is to still love it at the end, you know?
I had mentioned friendship before. Friendship, female friendship, as being a vitally important part of raising children. And then when you get older, of just getting through your day. Peggy and I have been close friends, not just buddies across the park, but close friends since, oh my gosh, I don't even want to admit how many years. And I'm sitting here learning all kinds of things about my girlfriend that I didn't know. It's been great.
You know, Missy, I was lucky enough. Do you know how I met Miss Lesley Stahl? I believe it was 1981. I'm being slightly arbitrary, but not too much. Lesley, this young star at CBS, was taking the place of Walter Cronkite or Dan Rather on the evening news that night, which meant she had to do the CBS anchor's radio commentary, which means I got to work for her. I remember that experience of meeting her and liking her and being very impressed. She was this beautiful, smart, highly professional person.
I have to say thank you. I mean, I'm not sure you want to hear this, but I counted the number of presidents that have sort of covered the span of time we're talking about. And in your collective careers, I think there have been at least a dozen, which is, but you all are still there, which is really quite amazing. And Peggy was pronounced a literary lion in 2016, and Lesley has won 2 Lifetime Achievement Awards. So how lucky are we to have had this time with you? And I really thank you for taking us through your personal and professional histories, because I learned too. So thank you, Lesley and Peggy, and I turn it over to Valerie.
Indeed. Thank you all so very much. What an extraordinary conversation. We're sending out rollicking virtual applause from our Zoom screens. It was a conversation that'll go down in history, I'm sure. I want to thank Lesley Stahl, Peggy Noonan, and our moderator, Missie Rennie, for being with us today. It's so heartening to start off this year's Max conference in this particular way. So thank you for this keynote. The conference series, Breaking News, Breaking Barriers, Women in American Journalism, will continue throughout Women's History Month and beyond. Please sign up for our mailing list and follow us at nyhistory.org to get the latest on the series. And finally, we hope to see you on Central Park West to view cover story, Katharine Graham, CEO, opening April 16th in our Joyce B. Cowin Women's History Gallery. Until then, thank you so much.
Thank you.